Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the International Affairs Forum at Northwestern Michigan College. We are very grateful to be back here together again tonight. Thank you for coming. We'll start this program on a sad note, remembering Jack Siegel. Jack left us earlier this month, and we're all grieving this loss together, alongside his family and Karen Pashel Siegel. He influenced so many lives here in Traverse City, and all this after an incredibly accomplished career in public service to our country as a veteran and as a diplomat. His impact and a lasting legacy lives on here at NMC, at Extended Education through his legion of pupils, and especially at the International Affairs Forum. He, alongside Karen, and he was the first to correct anyone who tried to give him accolades about IAF to make sure that Karen received the majority of the credit, and you all know that's true. Jack gave this community the gift of his time, energy, expertise, insight, humor, and grace, and we will miss him dearly, and we will strive to honor his memory with our ongoing service. So I'll continue in a spirit of gratitude by thanking all our supporting members, so many of you here tonight, our partners in our area high schools, our NMC faculty, our IAF advisory board volunteers, our IAF student leadership team volunteering here tonight, so many folks who make this program possible. And tonight we're especially honored to partner with Central Michigan University and the Hart-Milliken Speaker Series for Integrity in Politics. NMC has a long-standing relationship with CMU. So as we shaped this program, the fit made perfect sense. A shared commitment to civil discourse and to bipartisan, cross-partisan, respectful exploration of the tough issues that we face together. And it's my great honor to have one of our partners with us, and I will welcome to the stage, with gratitude, Dean Richard Rothaus, Dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Social Sciences.
Thank you, Alex. Central Michigan University is honored to be the home of the Philip A. Hart and William G. Milliken Endowed Speaker Series for Integrity in Politics. It was created to honor Senator Hart and Governor Milliken and their tradition of bipartisan cooperation. And we are happy to be here this evening to support a speaker who models political integrity and encourages a civil, constructive approach to American politics and policymaker. And I know I have alumni in the room, so you know what comes next. Fire up!
Thank you, Dean Rothaus, and we're very grateful to Central Michigan University for their partnership. Moving on, let's welcome our satellite partners gathering to our north in Leland at the Old Art Building. There are 32 people at the Old Art Building tonight. Our friends to the east, our friends to the east in Rogers City, the Zonta Club of Rogers City at the Presque Isle District Library. And then, yeah, sure. We can clap for all of these latitudes together. We'll also welcome tonight, making an impact across northern Michigan and to our south, a classroom at Central Michigan's Onspach Hall. There are 11 students joining from Mount Pleasant tonight, so we can clap for that one too. The clapping is good, but if we bring the house lights, you can wave at them over there. There you go. Great. Okay, along with our supporting members, our leadership circle supporters, here are a few folks who make this multi-generational education platform possible. Thank you to our gold sponsors for this 32nd season of IAF. That's Central Michigan University, Grand Traverse Pie Company, and Thomson Retractor. And a very sincere thanks to our business community members featured here. This is a growing membership segment, so please spread the word with business owners who make our region thrive. These folks are making a real difference in how we put these programs forward for you all and for all of us. Quick reminder to silence your cell phones, your mobile devices, think I did that. And here's how we'll run our program this evening. I'll be back up for a Q&A session after our moderated conversation. And the Q&A option for everyone in person or online is to email questions to iaf@nmc.edu. That's the preferred method. And for everyone online, you can submit questions via the Zoom Q&A function at any point during the program. Last method for the audience here is you can flag down one of our student volunteers for a question card if you feel like testing out your penmanship. Okay, now to introduce our moderator and our honored guest for this evening. Our moderator for the evening is Major General Mike Lehnert. Mike is the co-chair of the International Affairs Forum Advisory Board. He retired from the Marine Corps as a Major General after 37 years of service in 2010. From 2010 to 2012, he was the Senior Advisor to the Commissioner for Customs and Border Protection. Until 2017, he served as the National Vice Chairman of the Student Veterans of America. He serves as the National Chair of the Advisory Board for the Endangered Species Coalition, indulging his passion for the environment. In 2010, he was honored with the Peacemaker Award by the National Conflict Resolution Center for his work defending human rights at the Guantanamo Detention Facility, where his experience was documented in Karen Greenberg's book, The Least Worst Place. He and his wife, Denise, are delighted to be part of this vibrant community, and we are delighted to have his service to the IAF Advisory Board. Major General Mike Lehnert. And now our distinguished guest speaker for this evening. Dr. Kori Schake is a senior fellow and director of Foreign and Defense Policy Studies at the American Enterprise Institute. She previously served as Deputy Director General of the International Institute for Strategic Studies and has held senior roles at the U.S. Department of State, the Department of Defense, and on the National Security Council at the White House. She is the author of 5 books, most recently, The State and the Soldier, A History of Civil-Military Relations in the United States. Schake has taught at Stanford, West Point, the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, and the University of Maryland, and writes widely on foreign policy and American leadership. And now, please give a warm International Affairs Forum welcome to Dr. Kori Schake and Major General Mike Lehnert.
What a handsome and intelligent-looking audience we have here tonight. Okay, we're going to get right into this, and I'm going to refer to you as Kori, if you don't mind, and I'm Mike. So we're going to talk a little bit about your first book before we get into some of the more current event questions that I intend to ask you, because after reading it, I felt that it's an extraordinary scene setter for the situation that we deal with today. Kori's book, The State and the Soldier, is I think, a profoundly interesting book that makes you think about our history. And Kori, in the beginning of the book, you make a really eloquent case that George Washington, both in his capacity as a military leader of the Revolution and later as President of the United States, established the norms for civil-military relations that extended into the 21st century. So I'd like you to talk a little bit about those norms and why do they matter today?
I love it when you pitch slow and over the middle of the plate like that, Mike. So thank you all for coming out tonight for this conversation. I'm very grateful and very happy to be here. So I think that we would have a very different civil-military relationship in the United States if it didn't start with George Washington laying the foundation stone. And the 2 examples of Washington's contributions that I think are most consequential for how the American military thinks about itself and its ironclad subordination to civilian control in this country. The 2 examples are, the first, Washington sets the precedent that it's the civilian leadership who get to set the strategy and determine the resources. It's the moment where the United States military breaks away from European militaries, right? In Napoleon's France or Bismarck's Prussia, the military determined the strategy and the resourcing. Washington starts out fighting the American Revolution in the way that in a European manner. He wants a decisive battle to determine the outcome. And he tries 3 separate times, the invasion of Quebec and the Battle of Brooklyn Heights, most notably, to have a decisive battle and win the war. And Washington actually isn't a very good general. What he is a great leader. And so he keeps writing military plans that his army cannot carry out. And the reason we don't lose the revolution is because Washington surrounds himself with these young sparklers, Nathaniel Greene, the Marquis de Lafayette, Daniel Morgan, Alexander Hamilton. And they practice what in the military, in the modern military, we'd call mission command, right? You know what the boss wants to have happen. Go find a way to do it. And in that, the youngsters keep saying, all we have to do is keep an army in the field and we have a revolution. The winning strategy for the 13 colonies is just keep fighting until Britain stops fighting. It's classic insurgency strategy. And Washington, after the Battle of Brooklyn Heights, he still doesn't want to do it. It's not easy for him to concede that he calls that form of warfare a lesser form of cowardice. But he realizes that the Republic cannot produce for him an army that can do anything else. And so that's a really important example that Washington sets. The second, and the one that always tears at my heartstrings, comes in 1783. So it's 2 years after Cornwallis had surrendered at Yorktown. But the British are still in possession of Manhattan. So Washington's army is encamped at Newburgh, upstream of the Hudson. And Alexander Hamilton, then in the Continental Congress, wants to force the Congress to give itself revenue-raising powers. And so he gets this classic Hamilton, right? He gets this big idea that Washington should march his army on the Congress in Philadelphia and threaten that they will not disband until they are paid and given pensions, because that will scare the Congress into providing revenue powers. Washington famously responds that an army is a very dangerous instrument to play with, and he won't do it. But then he goes back up to Newburgh, and he gathers his officers together. He stations 6'6", 240-pound Major General Henry Knox at the door to take into custody anyone who won't sign an oath of allegiance to the Continental Congress. And then he does the best part. He acknowledges to these unhappy, unpaid, unfed military officers that Congress is terrible at their job. But he says, they don't need to be good at their job to merit our subordination to their authority. We yearn to be the first army in 1,000 years that isn't a threat to democracy. And that's the norm that's most important that Washington establishes. And because he goes on to the presidency, his example buys time for the norms to gel and for the institutions of the new country to gain strength. And it was completely unique to have a military then, and it's even a marvel now that as strong, as popular, as influential in policymaking as the American military is, they have not in 250 years ever been a threat of state capture or a military coup.
Well, thank you, Kori. So you've got some fans. I'm going to stick with your book for just a little bit longer because I thought was fascinating is that these norms didn't come into place right away. You described some military leaders who defied presidential authority, including General Wilkerson, which maybe you want to tell him a little bit more about it.
Such a scoundrel.
Let me put it this way, he made Benedict Arnold look like a choir boy.
It's true.
Jackson, Taylor, Fremont, Lee and Custer, and a little bit later in history, of course, MacArthur famously didn't follow orders, and we know what happened to him. But what are the dangers? I'd like you to talk a little bit about some of these characters, and then ask the final question, what are the dangers if a president begins to test the president's limits under the Constitution or orders actions clearly in violation of the Constitution? And so ask the question when it is appropriate not to follow orders. So let's start with the bad guys and then finish up with that question.
So the second chapter of the book is called The Bad Examples, because you have for about the 100 years after the founding of the Republic, you have these occasional examples of charismatic, effective military leaders acting in excess of their orders. So Wilkinson, so anybody care to guess who the first American president to assign military officers based on their party politics was? Who said Thomas Jefferson? I've never had anybody get that right. Well done.
I told you this is a very intelligent audience.
Yes, Thomas Jefferson cashiers all of Washington's young sparklers because they were Federalists. And he wanted people who agreed with his party politics. He appoints James Wilkinson, who was central to Aaron Burr's plot, who was court-martialed twice. It was said of Wilkinson that he had never won a battle or lost a court-martial. He was a Spanish agent for the entire 12 years. He was the senior officer in the American military. Theodore Roosevelt calls him the worst scoundrel in American history. And so he's terrible. Andrew Jackson invades Florida and puts President Monroe in constitutional trouble with the Congress and nearly provokes a war with Spain that it's not clear the United States would have won. He invades 200 miles into Spanish Florida. Let's see. So Fremont is a two-time Bad Guy Award winner. During the Mexican War, he precipitates action to take possession of California when that is not policy. And Commander Sloat, the Navy officer who takes possession of what was then called Yerba Buena and is now called San Francisco, was operating under the belief that Fremont was under orders because he couldn't imagine a major in the Army aggregating to himself that political authority. The worst behavior, I should say, of Fremont, though, is during the American Civil War. When he was a major general, he was the military governor of the border state of Missouri, and he declared that he would hang any Confederate, and he declared emancipation when it was not yet Abraham Lincoln's policy, and nearly precipitated the secession of Missouri and Kentucky, the two border states. So again, and the reason Fremont did it, so Fremont had also been court-martialed previously. What you see in these upstarts, in the bad examples, is people who are really good at what the military does and think they know better or deserve better than their political leadership. What you don't see is them having a following in the military, bringing military units to bear in support of insurrection. That never happens in the American case, and it's incredibly rare, and it makes it very easy to cashier the officer and stop the problem.
Okay, well, thank you. I'm going to go to that. Okay, I'll just rephrase the question for the benefit of the audience. Okay, so all military officers, regardless of service, take an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States, unlike enlisted people who take an oath to obey the orders of the president and the officers appointed over them. There's a distinction between those two oaths. So when is it appropriate not to follow the orders?
Yeah. It's a really important question, and it's important now because I think the political leadership in our country, and not just the president, Senator Tuberville in the Senate holding up 400 and some military appointments and assignments over a policy the military did not choose but was required to implement. President Trump just this week gave a speech at one of the B forts, Benning or Bragg, in which he told soldiers they should vote for him. That's an extraordinary breach of the norms of behavior that politicians have respected for the last 250 years towards our military. So the American system is built on the expectation that orders are going to be legal. So the system wasn't built to bear the kind of burden that it's bearing at the moment. I think there hasn't been this much politicization pressure on the military since probably Thomas Jefferson. But here's the thing. If we get, and of course, I can think of orders that the American military would refuse to obey. Firing on American citizens, for example. Like, I just don't think they'd do it. But the problem is that if we get to the point where a president is issuing an illegal order, the Secretary of Defense is transmitting and supporting an illegal order, the place to solve this problem is at the higher civilian levels. And I noticed during the debate over the boat strikes in the Caribbean that our public discourse telegraphed down very quickly to should this Navy admiral have carried out this order. And if we get to that point, the system has already failed, my friends, because for somebody to disobey an order, they will be taken into custody and court-martialed. And in a military court-martial in our country, the serviceman or woman has to prove that the order was illegal. The burden of proof is not on the state, it's on the individual. And that, I think, is weight we should not expect our military to carry. We should fight this problem at the higher civilian levels because that's what the system is designed to do.
So one of the things that we're seeing in the Supreme Court is a movement towards the unitary executive theory. If you take, and it doesn't matter which side of the aisle we're talking about, if we are assuming that the president has nearly unlimited powers, where do you see that theory headed?
So it's a really interesting question because I do think the court has been trying to do two things. The first is they've been trying to push back into political channels, political questions. And that's one interpretation of the unified executive theory, right? If you want to fight about abortion, the place to do that is in Congress, not the courts, is the Roberts Court's majority view. But they just in December passed or decided on Illinois versus Trump, a very different approach. What they decided, what the court ruled on Illinois versus Trump was that the president had to withdraw National Guard troops from Los Angeles, Portland, Chicago, and also Minneapolis if the president tried to go that route in the midst of the crackdown in Minneapolis. The court ruled the president had neither the constitutional nor the statutory basis to call National Guard troops into federal service. And so I think what we are seeing is the court beginning to restrict in important ways the executive power that they so grandiosely gave the president in the last several years.
Okay, well, thank you. One of the things that you talk about in your book is both senior officers who were successful and some who perhaps stepped over the line in terms of speaking truth to power. In other words, giving their professional opinion without moving into that area that you define as the prerogative of the elected leaders. What is a senior officer's responsibility in your point, and where does it stop?
Oh, I love that question. And after I answer it, I want you to answer it, since you have been one of them. I worked for General Powell when he was chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and the two really important lessons I learned from that experience was, first, mostly what the American military are great teachers, because they live in an environment where you can't be good at your job unless you can make everybody around you good at their job. And so they're fundamentally teachers. And the second thing that I learned is that, and this I learned from Powell himself, is that military leaders, like politicians, have a constituency. And that constituency is the young Americans who are going to be in harm's way. And so they have a responsibility to give advice that risks those lives only for important purposes and with carefully thought through plans for the doing of. But I also think it's important to understand that the military can't save the republic, and we sometimes expect them to. It's not the military's job to tell the president, you can't do this, because that puts the military's judgment above the judgment of whatever lunatic we elect to high office in the country. And I'm only half kidding about that, right? Because you don't want a military that believes its judgment is superior to the judgment of people we elect to aggregate our preferences. Most senior military officers have never balanced a budget. They've never run a healthcare system. The things that presidents have to do, building political constituencies for common action, is not something we want our military in the business of. What's your answer, though, Mike?
In terms of where the line is? Yeah. I think that, well, first off, you're exactly right, Kori. If, whatever you say, you basically have to be able to prove it. Some of you out there know that I was in the position in Guantanamo of having to tell the Secretary of Defense that I would not torture prisoners. Now, they don't say, Mike, I want you to torture prisoners. That's not the way it works. I wished it did in the movies or something like that. But basically what happens is the Secretary of Defense comes down and talks to a brand new Brigadier General and says, really getting this information out of these folks is really hard. And it's really important, Mike. And we're going to have to ask you to do what we call enhanced interrogation techniques. And some of them may include waterboarding and cold and deprivation of food. And I said, Mr. Secretary, that sounds like torture to me. And yeah. Well, because I was a Marine, he figured I didn't get it. He came down twice. And then they just figured, since I was only supposed to be down there for 60 days until the Army could get there, I was down there for 99 days, and then I left. And, I could have been fired, but at the same time, I think that you do have a responsibility as a senior officer to speak truth to power. It's extraordinarily important. And if we expect our military to be brave enough to face bullets, we ought to be able to at least tell the truth and say what we believe. But at the same time, and Kori is absolutely right on this point, you do have a responsibility to follow dumb orders, not necessarily illegal ones.
So we have a term for it in academia, lawful but awful. And there are a lot of them. Again, another thing I learned from General Powell was if soldiers aren't complaining to you, it doesn't mean they don't have complaints, it just means they don't trust you, right? Because they more often than not think what you want them to do is dumb.
Well, you know, I'm just going to share this. I had a young soldier at Guantanamo say, General Lehnert, why are we treating these people so decently? You know that they wouldn't treat us like that. And he was complaining. And I said, you know, soldier, you're absolutely correct. They wouldn't treat us this way. But if we treat them like they would treat us, we become them.
Perfect answer.
So anyway, this isn't about me. So we're going to talk about, I think what I'd like to do is ask a couple of questions about the military before we move on to the current events, because I really want to get into that. You talk about the all-volunteer force, and you know, there is the potential for a greater distance between the civilian population and a professional military. Do we have a danger of having a Praetorian Guard, do you think?
So Mike's point is the point that the founding fathers were obsessed about, right? You know, several of the leading complaints in the Declaration of Independence are about the behavior of British military in the colonies. 13 of the 85 Federalist Papers directly address the risks that a standing military would pose to democracy. You cannot get the Constitution of the United States ratified without the Second and Third Amendments. The Second Amendment giving governors the authority to have well-regulated militia to protect themselves from the federal government. So, I mean, in 1775, the Massachusetts Bay Colony issued a proclamation. They were under siege by the British Army at this time, and they nonetheless issued a proclamation saying that they look with trepidation on having an army in their midst, even if it's comprised of their fellow citizens. So Praetorianism, the belief that the military is going to become more powerful than the civilians elected to office, it was an obsession early in the Republic. And we don't even really think about it now because the American military has for so long been so reliably subservient. Mike's point about the all-volunteer force, since 1973, we haven't had conscription in the United States, and we have made a policy choice that we only need 0.5% of our population in military service. So we have a very small military relative to our population, and since 9/11, they have lived on military bases where they shop at military grocery stores, their kids go to school on post, so there's even less interaction with civilian communities. So I do think there is a very wide gap between our civilians and our military communities. And I would also say it's been aggravated by COVID as well, because military recruiters couldn't meet with people in person, they couldn't give talks at junior highs, you didn't have junior ROTC programs meeting, all of those kinds of things. But I don't think that gap, which is a source of concern, is a source of concern for Praetorianism. Because the saving grace, so I'm going to tell you the difference between the Army and the Marine Corps right now.
Please do.
You guys saw last summer the Army's 250th birthday. They had a kind of ramshackle parade in Washington, and it was so sweet and it was so earnest, right? Like the president wanted it to look like a North Korean military parade. And instead, you have soldiers who don't march very well and invite little girls to sit in the seat of a helicopter and imagine themselves as pilots, right? The earnestness of the Army. They wanted the whole country to come to their birthday party. The Marines don't invite anybody but Marines to their birthday party.
It's true. Okay, So we're
You're
gonna
blushing, Mike.
a little bit. But we're going to segue into a little bit, we're going to move into current events, but keep this same theme here. Should the U.S. military be used for immigration enforcement?
No.
Thank you.
And I'll say why. So, the American military has the great good fortune to be respected, to be admired, and to be appreciated by the American public. And a big part of the reason that that is such a positive relationship is because since 1878, the United States military has been prevented by law from being involved in domestic law enforcement. So Americans aren't afraid of our military, and that's a huge part of the positive relationship that draws quality people into our force, that keeps them in the force, and that connects the public to that force. And whatever you think of immigration enforcement, people trained to do immigration enforcement should do it, not the American military.
I agree. Okay, we're going to move a little bit more into current events. We're going to talk about Greenland. Yeah, should we invade Greenland? I'm going to be more specific. I think
More specific than should we invade Greenland?
What is the strategic? I'm going to be a little bit more nuanced, actually. What's the strategic value of Greenland, and does our relationship with Greenland, Denmark, or NATO need to change in order to achieve our strategic objectives or keep America safe?
So there is strategic value to Greenland in three ways. First, the Greenland-Iceland United Kingdom gap in the advances to the Atlantic Ocean are really important for the tracking of submarines and ships. That's one way in which Greenland is really important. It's strategic territory. The second reason Greenland has strategic value is as militaries and commercial enterprises begin to operate in the Arctic, Greenland is an important part of that constellation. And the third reason Greenland is strategically important is because since 1949, Denmark, which controls Greenland, has been an ally of our country. Denmark has had more casualties fighting in Afghanistan as a proportion of their population than the United States did. And we are repaying that solidarity incredibly poorly by threatening to take Greenland from Denmark. It's terrible. It's the equivalent of, I don't know, Russia saying they needed to start negotiating with Puerto Rico because Puerto Rico might become independent someday and Russia couldn't stand not to have a relationship with it. We would be through the roof if another country did that to us. And two other points on this. The last country to sell sovereign territory was actually Denmark. In 1917, they sold what we call the Virgin Islands to the United States, and we committed in those negotiations to honor Denmark's claims to Greenland. And in 1951, we signed a status of forces agreement with with Denmark, and they have permitted everything we have ever asked for on access to Greenland. We had 17 military bases in Greenland during the Cold War, and we chose to telescope them down to a single one. One other reason I should have said about the strategic importance of Greenland. If you think it's possible to protect the vast expanse of the United States from cruise or ballistic missile attacks, having radars in Greenland actually really matters.
Thank you. So let's move south. What is the impact of the decision to remove Venezuelan's President Maduro through military action? And the corollary to that is I'd like to just talk a little bit about if we if Venezuela does not provide their energy assets to Cuba, what will be the impact on Cuba as well? So Venezuela, then Cuba.
I am starchy about war powers issues. I actually think the President of the United States should not be able to utilize military forces unless Congress has given an authorization for it or the United States is under attack. Neither of those conditions pervade. The Trump administration is just bad at strategy, right? I mean, the argument for the smash and grab to take President and Mrs. Maduro into custody was drug trafficking. But in the same week, President Trump pardoned the convicted former president of Honduras who was doing a prison sentence in the United States. So the contradictions in Trump administration policy make me crazy. The effect, though, we removed Maduro, replaced him with his complicit vice president, and left the defense minister and the interior minister in power. And so there's an elected government in Venezuela, and we didn't put it in power right? Like the democratically elected government of Venezuela should have been put in power if we were going to do that. But the Trump administration didn't actually want to commit the effort to make that change. And so they just grabbed Maduro and said, it's your problem, to Venezuela.
I find myself in a very odd position of trying to find something that I can get Dr. Schake to talk about in terms of a positive thing for the administration, knowing where she comes from. So let's talk about the recent Munich Security Conference. Can you make an argument, first off, that some of the things the administration has done has caused NATO to make greater investments in their defense, their own defense? And if you do that, what are they beefing up to defend against? Russia, I suspect. That would be the most logical adversary in case Russia decides to take something other than Ukraine. So if perhaps you can explain to me, was this a good thing that NATO is investing more? And then how do we articulate, getting back to tactics versus strategy, why Rubio would go to Slovakia and Hungary immediately thereafter?
So every American president since Harry Truman has complained that Europeans don't do enough for their own defense, right? Harry Truman, Dwight Eisenhower, John Kennedy, everybody has the same complaint. And it is true that President Trump's threats to abandon our allies have frightened them enough that they are doing more for their own defense. But two countervailing forces. The first is they're not just worried about defending themselves against the Russians. France, Germany, and Denmark sent troops to Greenland because they were worried we were going to invade a NATO ally. And so the Trump administration seems not to understand that playing team sports is actually America's superpower, right? It's the only way you get to the economy of scale to manage the problem of China, is if we have a political, economic, and military sphere of cooperation with friendly countries. And the only reason countries assist our efforts is because they think we're the good guys. Being the good guys actually really matters. No dominant power in history has had as much voluntary assistance as the United States has gotten to uphold what makes it safe and prosperous. And we are burning through that. To the question about Rubio going to Hungary and Slovakia, the Trump administration's national security strategy that they put out last year says that the United States believes in sovereignty for states. And so we are no longer going to try and advance democracy, because that's interfering in the domestic politics of other countries. And then it goes on to say, we need to interfere in the domestic politics of Germany, of Britain, of Hungary, of Slovakia, to bring right-wing governments to power. So Mike is right. I am ferocious in my criticism of Trump administration strategy, because I think the president is genuinely doing damage to the well springs of American security and prosperity.
Okay. Well, thank you, Kori, for at least explaining my cognitive dissonance. It helps a lot. Following on, because we're going to start questions from the audience, I'm going to ask you a related question. What happens if allies lose confidence in the United States and make alternative plans that exclude U.S. involvement?
That is the most important question in American foreign policy right now, because America's ability to act in the world is actually enabled through the cooperation of other countries. I was just this afternoon reading a piece in the Wall Street Journal where Britain is denying us the use of bases in Britain if we are going to attack Iran. We need bases, we need overflight rights, we need fuel, we need ammunition, we need support in international institutions. And by threatening allies and being unreliable ourselves, we are putting at risk an order in which we are easily interoperable with other countries, and they assist our efforts to do what we need to do in the world.
Thank you, Dr. Schake. Now, we're going to take some questions from this very good-looking and intelligent audience.
Okay, thank you, Kori, Dr. Schake, Mike, Major General Lehnert. It's hard to interrupt this pair, have absolutely instantaneous rapport, so the quality has been phenomenal. Okay, but we can take some questions from online. You can use the Q&A function if you're out there on Zoom. You can also email them, iaf@nmc.edu, and the concise questions help us a lot. And we have one very concise question from online, and this person asks, states, the Venezuela-Cuba oil question was not answered. Can you please revisit that? I think it was maybe the Cuba part or the oil part. So I'll put that to you, Kori.
Yeah, I didn't answer it because I honestly don't know the answer. The U.S. theory of regime change in Cuba since 1961 has been, this is an economy that cannot make do without access to dollars and access to the American market. And the regime in Cuba is still in power. And so I am skeptical that economic constriction actually produces political change. I think the theory of the case is deeply questionable, not just in Cuba, in Russia. I mean, it has a lot to do with the extent to which the political leadership is in ironclad control of the country, the tolerance of the public for scarcity. I mean, I went to Cuba once when I was teaching at Stanford. I took a student group there because academic groups can go. And there are these amazingly beautiful 1950s American cars, and they all have South Korean engines in them. Yeah. So the creativity of societies under duress, I think, makes it very hard, for me at least, to predict when economic restrictions are going to produce political effects. So I don't know the answer.
This is very honest. Thank you. Okay. Next question comes from an in-person audience here. Sort of an interpretation and a question. Why do you think the Second Amendment has morphed from state militias to individual gun rights?
the Supreme Court, right? I mean, at the end of the day, the court's decision that a well-regulated militia includes individual gun ownership and that restricts the ability of city and state governments to infringe on that. I mean, at the end of the day, the court decides. And the court's decision on that is what expanded the aperture.
Thank you. I did expect this for all of you, that Kori is one of the most concise respondents I've ever seen. And so we need lots of questions. We need lots of good questions. I can also defer to Mike because I know his list goes much longer than he got to. Okay, so next question is, if the superpower of the U.S. is being the good guy, but that failed to get NATO to step up, and if Trump is destroying our credibility by being the bad guy, what is the alternative to get NATO to step up?
Okay, I reject the premise of the question that America's 31 closest friends aren't stepping up. They're not doing all we wish they would do, but what they are doing is an enormous amount. I mean, they have allowed American forces to live in their countries. They have produced military forces that not only fight alongside us to protect their countries, that have fought in every war we have dragged them into, and contributed enormously to the security of the United States. So I don't think it's true that I think we are derisive of the contributions of our closest friends at our peril.
Thank you.
So I'm sorry, can I trample back in? To use the example of Canada, right? Canada spends 1.2% of their GDP on defense. And yet, if there were a nuclear attack on the United States, it is entirely possible that the first voice the President of the United States would hear would be Canadian, because we have a common North American air defense zone, and Canadian soldiers have protected this country alongside us since its establishment at the end of World War II. So it's just not true that our allies don't do a fair share of the burden.
Okay, next question. This one comes from the folks at the old art building. Can you speak about the buildup of forces in Iran? Is the solution a military one?
So I don't know the answer to that because I don't know what problem the president thinks he's solving. I have heard three separate explanations. One is that although the president claimed that the strike we and the Israelis did several months ago completely obliterated the Iranian nuclear program, one explanation is we have to go completely obliterate the Iranian nuclear program. The second explanation is we need to kill the entire leadership because they won't agree to us obliterating the entirety of the Iranian nuclear program. My friends, if I would just offer a caution to you that military strikes that kill a bunch of the Iranian leadership are going to put the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps into control of that country. And that is objectively a worse outcome for the people of Iran and for the security of the United States. And the third explanation that I have heard is that we need to get them to agree that they will never again support Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthi, and they need to eliminate their ballistic missile programs. Digging out the 10,000 or so Iranian ballistic missiles, first of all, they're going to fire them all at Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates while the attack is going on. But second of all, that's not a standoff strike, that's a war. And again, I'm starchy about stuff like this. I think the president needs a congressional authorization for the use of military force, And I think he has a moral responsibility to do a much better job of explaining to the American public why we are doing what he thinks he's going to do.
Next question comes from the in-person audience. How will the Board of Peace affect the influence of the UN?
It will not affect the influence of the UN. So it is absolutely true that the United Nations is ineffectual on issues of war and peace. But it's ineffectual on issues of war and peace for two important reasons. One is that the strongest powers, the ones who have vetoes in the UN Security Council, have very different interests in the world. And so we veto each other's plans more often than not. And the second reason the United Nations is ineffective is that we dump the problems we don't care enough to solve into the United Nations. And so nobody cares enough to fix it, and so the UN treads water on a lot of things. The other thing I would say about the UN is that they are actually really good at several things. They're very good at health issues. They're very good at stabilizing an existing peace. I mean, US troops in the Sinai since what, 1973? When there is an existing peace, the UN can build stabilization by neutral peacekeeping forces. But the notion that President Trump's Board of Peace, which doesn't include Britain, France, Germany, China, or Russia, so it only has, of the permanent members of the UN Security Council, it only has one. So it's not going to be able to deal with problems among the strongest powers in the order. Second, President Trump is going to be president for life of this board. The only reason the American president matters is because they bring the power and resources of the American government to bear. President Trump being the head of the Board of Peace for life, this is a grift, my friends. It's not a Board of Peace.
Okay, we're doing some serious globe-trotting, but let's stay in the Northern Hemisphere here. So
I love it.
What fraction of EU military spending, this is from an in-person question, what fraction of EU military spending comes to the U.S., i.e. is spent on U.S. weapons? And what will happen to this spending on our current policy path?
Okay, I love that question because the underlying premise is exactly right. Europeans spend their money buying American weapons because we want our troops to be interoperable. And the aid that the United States had been giving to Ukraine was also a major benefit to American weapons producers. It kept industrial lines open that we need for our own forces because we were supplying European allies and we were supplying Ukraine. And they are a rounding error of what we actually need for ourselves. The European Union has just passed, I think it's called the SAFE Act, to create a $60 billion pool to begin production of European-only weapons that are unconnected to American defense industry because they watched us cut off arms supplies to Ukraine and worried that we would do it to our NATO allies as well.
Okay, next question from online. What is to become of the U.S. If for the next 3 years, given the underqualified Secretary of War, the loss of diplomacy, and the president's predilection for illegal demonstrations of force? And the reason I ask this question is because I know that the investment in diplomacy for this country and for this particular audience is very, very important after decades worth of guests from our diplomatic service have graced this stage.
Yeah, so I am more optimistic about the resilience of the country than I think the questioner is. Because I think what we are going to see so I should say, President Trump likes to compare himself to Franklin Roosevelt, right? We get the idea of the 100 days of a presidency, of rapid action to change the dynamic of the country, to change laws, to expand executive power. Those are all things Franklin Roosevelt did, struggling to pull the country out of the Great Depression. We obviously weren't in a Great Depression when President Trump took office, but he is modeling the fast movement to expand executive power, change laws, and change the political dynamic. He has moved faster than the courts can constrain him, faster than the distribution of power, not just in the Congress, which is cowed by my fellow Republicans in Congress have been cowed by President Trump, but governors acting as autonomous actors, cities acting as autonomous actors, civil society in the United States acting as civil actors. But I think 2026 is going to be the year where all of those things catch up. And I think we already begin to see it with the cases that the Supreme Court has taken on the National Guard, on tariffs, on several other issues of executive power, where the president has made assertions that are at least questionable, and the court at least thinks they're questionable because they took the case. But also civil society is catching up. I mean, we saw in Minneapolis and we saw in Chicago communities organizing to push back against what they thought was excessive government involvement. And that's the genius of the American system. And I think it is increasingly going to constrain President Trump domestically, but I worry that because most American presidents, once they become lame ducks, and President Trump could well become a lame duck after the November elections this year, they turn their attention to foreign policy. And it is in foreign policy where I think the president's doing the greatest damage to America's security and long-term prosperity.
Okay, the next question. Are smart people like you, Dr. Schake, having conversations with Republicans in Congress about these issues, and how do they respond? How do we get Congress to fulfill their role?
Yes, yes, and yes. So I am the captain of a pirate ship of 70 foreign and defense policy experts at a conservative think tank in Washington, the American Enterprise Institute. And we work with the administration when we can, with Congress when we can, and to affect public attitudes about policy choices if we can't affect the executive or the legislature. And so, yeah, we are talking to congressional staffs and members of Congress all the time about Greenland, about the use of the National Guard or active duty troops, about the invasion, potential invasion or potential attacks on Iran, because I love that the American government is so porous to outside influence. You know, several thousand people come into any administration, and think tanks are where they live when they're making their case of why they should have those jobs. And so it's an administration in waiting, and it's weird as conservatives to be an administration in waiting in a Republican administration. But we fight our corner as best we can.
Thank you. Okay, good question about China here, China and Taiwan. Do you think the Trump administration intends to contest or contain China, or will they concede a Pacific Asian sphere of influence to China? And the question goes on further to talk about stepping back of unambiguous support to Taiwan. So you can take it from there.
It's a really important question, and I would commend to you a piece written by one of the scholars on my foreign and defense team, Zach Cooper. It's in the current issue of Foreign Affairs, and he argues that for the last 15 years at least, the United States government has been claiming that we are pivoting to Asia to manage the emergent threat of China. And Zach's piece argues the pivot to Asia has failed. And the question now is whether we defend the first island chain or whether we concede the independence of Taiwan and South Korea and fall back to the second island chain. And he explains why that would be a terrible idea. I worry about Taiwan considerably because I think President Trump genuinely wouldn't defend them. Because if you look at the way the president has talked about Ukraine, it's, you know, they live next to a bigger, stronger country. It's just too bad. And the applicability of that to China and Taiwan is, I think, obvious. Let me get on my high scholarly horse and say that people very often quote Thucydides from his Peloponnesian Wars, where one of the characters says that the strong do what they will and the weak suffer what they must. And people forget that this is the Athenians talking to the Melians as they are about to commit war crimes that will collapse their alliance system, which is the basis of their success, and Athens loses the war. So adopting this approach that, you know, the strong should get to do whatever they want, Thucydides' very lesson is that that courts catastrophe. Okay, I'm sorry. Thank you for indulging that.
Okay, we're going over our time, so I want to give Mike. I want to give you one more chance for one more question. Did you have anything that you didn't get to? A burning question that you didn't get to?
I think I'd like to know is the U.S. at an inflection point with the relationship between the executive, Congress, and the judiciary? Is it changing in fundamental ways, and is this shift permanent or temporary?
So I love the description of the Constitution of the United States as an invitation to struggle. And we are a disputatious country by design, and governing over diversity is really hard. And so the balance is always changing in the United States. And what, in my judgment, has destabilized our political system in recent years is Congress failing to exercise its Article I authorities in the Constitution. They have been much too deferential. And we all need to keep kicking our members of Congress until they do better than they are doing right now.
Thank you.
Amen,
It's always hard to come to the end of these discussions. We want to thank you for this very lucid conversation, and hopefully we can reprise this dynamic duo again. Before we hand it over for some final remarks from Dr. Schake, I want to extend our continued thank yous to all of those of you who support the International Affairs Forum. You make NMC vibrant, and you make this community asset possible with your support, and it's needed now as much as ever. A quick rundown of what's coming up next. Before I do that, excuse me, let me make sure to thank our partners from Central Michigan University, the Hart-Milliken Speaker Series. Yeah. This is the inaugural collaboration partnership here, and I hope that our partners will engage with us again in the future, and we can do this again under that umbrella of Hart-Milliken in the Milliken Auditorium. Yeah. Okay.
Alex, before
Yes, sir.
we turn, are you turning this over to Dr. Schake now, or do you have
I
something
had a
else?
few upcoming
Go
events
ahead.
to mention.
Go to the upcoming events.
Okay, I'll do them rapidly. You can find all this information at tciaf.com. March 19th, the new space race, how data, resources, and power are shaping our future. That's an event that's hosted by NMC students from the International Affairs Forum Student Leadership Team. They've undergone a great series of interviews. We'll have a great in-person speaker. Don't miss that one on March 19th. April 15th, we'll talk about the rights of nature. It's a global movement that's based in indigenous principles. We'll have Frank Bibbo, from a tribal attorney from the Center for Democratic and Environmental Rights. And that one is a grant-funded program thanks to the Grand Traverse Band of Ottawa and Chippewa Indians. Let's see. April 19th, a program in partnership with National Writers Series. IAF members get a discount for that one. It's on April 19th, a Sunday night at Traverse City West Senior High. So look in your email for that discount code. It's about Israel and Gaza and folks on both sides who have lost family and how they feel the future is peace, and peace is the only way forward. June 11th, we'll talk about climate, military leadership, and the fight for global security with Sherry Goodman, and that will be in conversation with Commander Ryan Hahn, U.S. Coast Guard, Air Station Traverse City, and he'll be speaking in his personal capacity. So that's what's coming up next. I want to thank you all for your engagement, your dedication to the mission at IAF. It was an important discussion this evening, and now I will turn it over for our final words, and then we can give resounding applause for Dr. Kori Schake.
Yeah. Well, what I want to do is, anytime I moderate, I read the books that the speaker has written. I watch YouTube and videos and everything to get a sense for, what types of questions I should ask. And I don't think I've ever plugged a book, but I am going to plug her book, The State and the Soldier. It is one that really makes you think. It's a good historical read, but the lessons in it are applicable to the situation that we're faced in today, and it really makes you think. So you don't have to plug your book, because I'm going to. Thank you, Kori.
Thank you, my friend. I appreciate that. I want to thank all of you. I want to thank you for your support to these terrific educational institutions. I want to thank you for your support of the civic engagement that this speaker series is representative of. And I want to thank you for being here tonight. Democracy is not a spectator sport, my friends, and the strength of us as communities is so important to our country's well-being. Thank you for all you contribute.